Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for what I'm sure is going to be a really insightful discussion about supporting women in business. We'll be talking about founders, women in corporate America, and everyone in between. We have some really amazing panelists here. Could you all introduce yourselves and also tell us what is the most supportive thing someone has said or done for you that impacted you as a woman in business?
Hi everyone, I'm Alex Cavoulacos. I'm the founders of themuse.com. We help people research companies and careers and work with employers to tell their story, why you should work there. One of the most impactful things that someone has done for me in my career is actually help me leave a company I was hesitating to leave. I wanted to go and start my own business. I felt ready to do it, but I felt a lot of loyalty to the organization where I was, and having someone believe in me and say, go, do it. If it fails, call me. But go was actually a push I really needed at the time.
Hi everyone, I'm Jenny Chiu. I'm the Vice President of Marketing at Maven Clinic. Maven Clinic is a digital healthcare company focused on women's and family health. So no matter what your path to parenthood, which we know today is very diverse, Maven offers you with on-demand support with lactation consultants, mental health providers, reproductive endocrinologists, career coaches, you name it. You can download our app and be able to get connected to a provider within minutes. Very helpful to me as I'm 5 months pregnant with my first child right now. I would say one of the things that someone did for me that was really impactful was one of my early managers advocated for me when I wasn't in the room. And she felt really strongly about making sure that there wasn't a pay gap between men and women on our team. And so we were hiring for a peer to me, and it was a male candidate that we were considering. They had gotten the offer. They were very aggressive with their negotiation and had asked for a salary that was outside of the band of what we're offering. And the company was considering giving it to him. And my manager stepped in and said, listen, we definitely want to attract the best talent and be competitive in the marketplace, but that also means we need to retain the best talent internally that we already have. And so if we're considering giving this guy this salary at this point, then we need to consider raising Jenny's salary so that there is no disparity that exists. And that just meant so much to me because I was in the room, I was in that conversation. And she shared that story with me afterwards, which just inspired such a huge amount of loyalty within me that I would follow her anywhere right now.
And I'm Susan McPherson. I'm the founder and CEO of McPherson Strategies. We are social impact and corporate responsibility consultancy. And I have to say this would be good for men or women. So I can't, just because I'm a woman, I can't assume that it was just good for me. But there goes my water. No, don't worry. Leave it on the ground because it's too much. I feel like I'm juggling. And what enabled me, I've taken many, many risks. I've moved numerous times in my career. And I would say that my success is very much because of my lack of fear of taking those risks. And it all goes back to when I was younger and my late father said to me, nothing is a prison sentence, except, of course, the prison sentence. However, when you go with that methodology, meaning like when you are leaving a place you love to move to another for a promotion or a new job, that place still exists. So you can always go back. And as long as you keep good relationships, people will welcome you back. That's mine.
Yes, I saved your water.
You know what? It's okay. We shouldn't be drinking out of plastic water bottles. I'm in social impact.
Yes. Hi there, Stacey, Olive, and I'm the Vice President of Talent Acquisition and Recruitment for the New York Times.
Just that little publication.
We
adore.
You've probably never heard of us.
The failed New York Times.
Yeah. There are two sort of breakthrough moments I had in my career. One was actually my first job, and it was actually in more of a sort of sales role since I am a recruiter at heart. I worked at an agency, and they just popped me right on the phone and opened a phone book, and I had to start making calls. And so my boss at the time gave me the best advice that no matter how senior someone is that you're on the phone with or that you have to negotiate with or talk to, they're just another human being, and you should treat all people with respect, but there's no need to feel differently because the person you're on the phone with is a managing partner or a director. Speak fearlessly. And I've really carried those words with me now for the past 15 plus years in my career. So they've really that really stood out to me. And then the second thing is I also come from the place of being a working mom. So that colors everything that I do. And when I was pregnant with my first child and working, I was really scared. I was scared. I didn't know how I could do this. How can I be a loving mom, and how can I work, and how can I do both? And you feel this fear. I don't know if you've ever felt it before. And my boss said to me, and she was not the easiest boss, but she said, really, what you can do if you want to make this work and be an actual working mom is you'll find amazing child care, and you'll treat that child care provider really, 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 really well. And I have taken that advice, and I've now had the same babysitter for 14 years. And my daughter is now 15. We're thinking about transitioning out, but she's become a part of our family. So I also took that advice to heart. So if you are thinking of having a child, father or mother, being a working parent, treat your child care providers really, really well. Don't be an asshole to them.
Stacey, I'm gonna need the name of your babysitter.
Yeah, she'll be ready for a new job.
Yeah, exactly. Save her for me.
Great, that's a great positive way to kick it off. And before we get to some more solutions, let's just back it up a little bit and talk about what are some of the unconscious biases out there in terms of how men versus women are perceived in the business world. For example, men are often judged by their potential, whereas women are only judged off their prior experience. So what else do you guys see out there? Susan, as both a founder and advisor, you have a lot of insight from both sides. Would you want to kick it off?
Well, there's 1,000 I can think of, and I think it's far more than just men and women. I mean, we have now multi-gender, we're living in a multi-gender world. And I also would say it's also ethnicity and color and all these things. And, I think what, first of all, has to be the driving force is that to have the most successful business and the most successful workforce, you need one that is absolutely as inclusive as possible. And I like to lead with the word of inclusive instead of diverse. We all know the reasons why. And I think it really, I think it's important also to realize the word, when we think of unconscious bias at work, we have unconscious bias in all parts of our lives. So I think the first step is to break it down and not make our work person different than our life person. And in terms of specific are you looking for specific examples?
Sure.
I think it's fascinating to me always when, men and women will see, and again, other genders too, but the notion of the same job. And how many women do we know that will see a job description and say, well, I can do one of the 6. And men will see the 6 and be like, oh, well, I can do all of it. And even though they've had no experience in maybe 5 of them. So, that's a perfect example I see time and time again. And what I have done with our team, even though we are all women, so we want to hire men if anybody's looking, but is to blank out the name when we are looking at CVs and resumes so that we don't go into it with any preconceived notions. And again, we're a small company, but it does help erase any kind of, you just don't know. I mean, Alex will have 1 million given her job.
I think there's sort of the personal experience people have, but then there's also the research. So you both mentioned things that come out of very deep research where the job description one, the stats I had seen were if there are 10 bullets on your job description, men will apply if they have 5 to 6, women wait till 9 to 10. So every time you're adding more qualifications, you're actually narrowing your funnel because of the barrier that people internally take to jump and throw their hat in the ring. The one you talked about with potential versus prior experience, sort of what they're bringing to the table, that has been shown in terms of promotions, particularly in looking at research at corporate America. But as a founder, I feel like I've experienced that very much in the sort of fundraising space for startups and seeing side by side with male founders we know very well, talking about our pitches, talking about the reactions, and how many of the questions were asked. Our questions are often about the past, about what we have accomplished, how do we get to those numbers, could we do that again, versus what is the big vision. We are excited to talk about the vision and the potential, but we're being pulled back to talk about sort of the past, and that's not an experience as many of the male founders I know have had. And so I think there's a lot of parallels when you look at all that research, and it's men and women who are doing that, right? It's male and female bosses who are looking at the same sort of types of folks with the same backgrounds and not assessing them the same way. So I think your point about unconscious bias is a very important one, because often it's not coming from a malicious place or even a conscious place or a known place. And so the sort of personal education and self-awareness around it is very important, as well as the systems you can put in place to change it. One very interesting thing, and then I'll wrap it up, that I read recently was around changing the scales for performance reviews. When your scale is 1 to 10, men are much more likely to get 10s than women. When your scale is 1 to 6, the gap lessens. And there's something about a 10 out of 10, about whatever you think brilliant looks like, about whatever unconscious bias people bring to the table, that for the same population, you're more likely to call a man that brilliant, that 10 out of 10 perfect. But just by changing the scale, you can actually narrow that and give people a chance to be seen. So I think leading into that research can actually lead to change within organizations.
I think that's a really great point. I read some research lately where even the words that you use in the job description, if you say something like, we're trying to recruit a rock star or a stellar, or just like that kind of over-exaggerated term, that more men are going to be able to identify with that, and then women will filter themselves out. And so there is just like small things, even just in language, that we use. And then your note about not separating it from your personal life. I know when my husband and I were talking about planning for this baby, and the conversation actually focused a lot on me in terms of like, well, when are you telling your boss that you're pregnant, because you're going to start showing, and it's always after the first trimester when you get over that kind of fear of potentially a miscarriage. And I was like, why is the conversation just about me? And when I'm telling my manager, why are we not talking about when you're telling your boss? And I feel like there should be an equal, opportunity for both of us.
Men should have to put a pillow under their shirt.
And I was like, the day I tell my boss is the day you should be telling your boss. And this will become part of our mutual identity. Like, I shouldn't have to be the one that becomes all of a sudden the mom 6 months before the baby is here, and you get to be the single male high achiever at work.
How many of you had to carry the egg around when you were a kid, when they were teaching you? I think a few people my age here might have, yeah. And men had to do it too, and inevitably the men's eggs broke faster. Now that's a sexist comment, but this was back in the early 70s. Anyhow, you should have your husband carry an egg around with him.
So something I wanted to talk about is that nearly every discussion about supporting women in business puts a notable emphasis on maternity leave and work-life balance for mothers. We already got to it because it's so prevalent when you're a woman in the field. So this is a really important topic, but it's also something, as you said, Jenny, men are never asked about. They never ask the husband, who's going to take care of your baby while you're at work. So how do we tackle these issues without shifting the focus away from women's role as a business person and onto their motherhood?
Yeah, when we started Maven, one of the things that we really focused on is in delivering a really great maternal outcome for women and families. The program that we created was not just the traditional 9 months of when you're quote unquote pregnant. But we extended it to 15 months to say, that 6 months of when you are transitioning back into work is really, really important. And women actually need a lot of support there as well, because 43% of women will drop out of the workforce or ramp down in their careers after having a baby. Some by choice, but a lot of it is because of the larger infrastructural issues with financing childcare, not having supportive managers, returning to an environment that doesn't understand mothers. So we really focus.
Daycare, which is prohibitively expensive.
So we really focus on that 6 months too, and part of our program is providing these women with career coaches early on, so that you are preparing yourself for those difficult conversations with both your manager, but then your peers on what a coverage plan would look like for you. And then when you return to work, being able to proactively say to your manager and address any unconscious bias that might exist. Still assign those difficult cases to me. Don't just assume I don't want them anymore because I'm a mom now. And if that's still what you want, proactively say it. And I think, to Stacey's earlier point on the advice that her manager gave her, we really then also focus on manager training. So it's both sides of the conversation. How do women have the conversation, but then how do managers receive that and can proactively be prepared to have advice and recommendations and not kind of treat it with kid gloves and be scared to have the conversation, not because of, again, bad intent, but just because they don't feel like they have the tools to have the conversation.
I'd like to add, I think that women can support other women. I think being in a large organization on the panel, I'd love to speak to the power at the New York Times of our Women's Network, which is an incredible ERG group. And what they've done is create an entire sort of toolkit and packet that's filled with, advice and resources and things to supplement what the company provides, which is a generous parental leave, and sort of other counseling services that a lot of companies have available to all employees. Our Women's Network has rallied around, any working mom, and this toolkit is available, and our talent and inclusion team supports them by distributing it, making it accessible, and letting people know that the Women's Network has put this great. We're a company full of people who are very word-centric, so this is a really extensive packet. They've left no stone unturned, and including even a booklet of takeaways and quotes and encouragement, quotes from other women at the company that have had a successful return back to work from a parental leave. So I think that women can support other women in this way to allow them to not feel anxious about these things and to continue to focus on the good work they want to do and balancing their life.
I think one thing that's always challenging is it's a really important topic. There is a need for more support than there is today. But also the four of us are here on stage today talking about women's issues and not about what we do for a living. And most men get to just go on panels and talk about what they do for a living, which is really good for their careers. A lot of people of color know about this too. There's a diversity hacks. They go onto all the diversity inclusion panels, so they get to be the person who talks about that experience and not about what an amazing physicist they are or what an amazing salesperson they are. And so there is a tax to that, both time, obviously, but also to your career, that you're not building your brand as the thing you want to be known for. You're giving back, which is also very much expected of women. And so I think there's very much a sort of difficult, sometimes personal balance for people where I love doing panels like this. I do a lot of them. They also take away from building my business. And so I do them because they're important, and I do them because I wish I had gotten more advice. But it is a challenge, to your point, because it continues to, for those of you who know sort of the concept of the mental load at home between partners or spouses, where it's a lot of unseen work. This is some of the unseen or unvalued work sometimes, where you get a high five for going and doing the diversity panel, whatever that means based on your identity and what you're representing. But you're not necessarily getting a chance to focus on the work. And so I hope for more chances for women, people of color, other underrepresented groups to talk about the work, and for more men to be on panels like this talking about how they can support women, frankly.
That's a super great point. I want to turn it all to you in the audience now, actually, for a quick question. Could you raise your hand if you've seen a gender inclusion effort that missed the mark? Maybe it was ill-advised from the beginning, or the idea was there, but it failed in execution somehow.
Don't be shy.
Yeah, I see some hands going up because there's a lot of effort, but sometimes, that does happen because there's work to be done. So I'd love to hear from you all if anyone has an example of a gender inclusion effort they've heard of or seen that fell flat or missed the mark, and a better way to approach that so we could get it right next time.
I remember just one small experience at one of my former companies where, with all the best intentions, our people team was pushing on a diversity and inclusion hiring initiative. And so they gathered all the people in the company, and in small groups, but they gathered people in the company and basically had us go through our LinkedIn networks and submit contacts that we had who we thought would fill our diversity and inclusion goals. And I applaud their attempt in wanting to promote more, to recruit more candidates. But when I was sitting in the room going through my LinkedIn contacts, I was just like, this is so awkward. I feel like I'm racial profiling all my friends right now. How am I supposed to know what their experiences and backgrounds on this topic or the stories that they have in their personal lives? And so that to me felt like a good attempt, but definitely poor execution.
Never heard of that. That could take a long time. When the older you get, the amount of contacts you have on LinkedIn and who you actually still know on LinkedIn from 20 years ago. Anyhow, I was going to just offer out something to think about as we are moving into 2020, and that is 50% of Gen Z, there goes the water again, 50% of Gen Z, the youngest and the young, know somebody who doesn't identify as a gender or, very non-binary. And think of what that is going to mean for the future of diversity and inclusion. One of our clients is an organization called Gender Spectrum, and I would encourage if any of you work in this space and work in HR or anything, in the immediate response by some HR professionals, we have the bathrooms taken care of, or, we give multiple choices on the, forms we give out. That's not even cracking the code. Think about the business opportunities and everything else. So and I'm not pushing anything, it is fascinating to me what I've learned. So when we talk about D&I, think about that.
All right. And some say that as more women launch companies and get more involved with business in general, that progress will naturally take shape. It's kind of controversial, but what do you all think of this? And how might this type of thinking leave behind women of color, trans, non-binary women, LGBTQ plus women, and other unrepresented women? How might it leave them behind?
I'd love to start this one off in that I think there's two problems with that framing in my mind. One is assuming this will get better when women start companies means that women are responsible for fixing the problem. It is inherently baked into the belief. And just like with issues of race, issues of religious discrimination, of gender discrimination, whatever it might be, the people with the power are the one who can change it the most easily, and it is very, very hard to fight it. And so telling, women once you have all the power, you can make this better is, I think, just an incredibly crazy upside down way of trying to solve it, and removes any responsibility from non-women from solving the problem. The second thing is only for when you think about very quickly growing venture-backed companies, yes, a lot of women start small businesses. It's actually sometimes more women than men start businesses. But when you think about startups that are getting the vast majority of venture capital, only 3% of venture capital goes to female-founded companies. We are one of them.
2.2%.
Yeah, we are one of them, but it is incredibly challenging. And when you think about the amount of money that's out there, that's not going to solve the problem very quickly. Now, we have seen really innovative things come out of female-founded companies. We've seen different ways of thinking about culture and different ways of hiring that have started to spread, but I don't think leaning on that as the solve is going to make meaningful change. Yeah. Get off my soapbox.
So we could go a little more with the veteran capital talk. I'm sure everyone here is familiar with the fundraising gap. We already said some stats. That was actually last year, 2018, women received only 2.2% of venture capital money. And of course, women of color receive even less. There are a lot of funds popping up focused on women, VC initiatives, they're gaining attention, but these funds are a lot smaller. They don't have as much money to give. So how can we get more capital to female founders to make sure they can start and grow businesses too?
Oh, there's a question.
Well, no, something came up that we're starting to see in our industry, which is there is the whole concept of women and minority-owned businesses, and it's been around for about 20 years, and what's happening, and I'm wondering if the venture capital is creating the same venture capital problem, which is these women are now wanting out, and they can't sell the businesses because all of that women-owned business, they'll lose all their customers because their customers are incentivized by the fact that they're women-owned. So I can't go public, I can't sell, I can't give it to my son, and I've created this wonderful organization, and I don't know what to do with it.
Huh.
Just the quick recap of the question, just in case everyone couldn't hear.
Yeah.
Do you want to recap it?
Sure. So I was just discussing how there are a lot of funds and initiatives popping up to get more women venture capital money, but they're a lot smaller. It's not putting a huge dent in it. So how can we get more funds to women founders?
Yes. To the question we got here around whether a lot of small women and minority-owned businesses companies get credit, essentially, for working with them. And so it's created a challenge for women who've started very successful businesses who can't step back or sell their business because a lot of their business is tied to the fact that they have
Their
it with
customers are loyal because
so
of the
there's a
fact that
challenge
they're
there.
women.
For venture, it actually is not relevant in the sense that because we have we actually have female venture capitalists, but because they are funds, we don't count as a female. We don't get business for being a female in business. We can't get certified for that because a certain percentage of our company is owned by funds and not by my co-founder and I, who are both women. So in our case, it isn't relevant. I think to your question, there's what I've seen, and it's similar for other issues, is that in order to solve the fundraising gap between men and women, let's create a special fund over here. Call it our female fund or diversity fund or like special initiative, get a ton of great press around it, and then write much smaller checks.
Like your social impact fund, right?
And you write much smaller checks.
Yeah.
And male investors love saying, I'm so sorry it's not a fit for us, but you should really talk to this special fund over here that's going to write you much smaller checks. They don't add the last piece, but that is often the situation. And so you don't actually see a ton of difference in some of the main portfolios where the heavy hitting money is and where a lot of the actual investment in time is going, but they get sort of the special side project. I believe in order to change the business that the core fundamental fundraising should be coming out of the same pocket, right? And that they should be evaluating all those opportunities and getting a pipeline of really great opportunities and look at the businesses regardless of who founded them. But
there's platforms and things popping up for, and again, not answering your specific question, but many women start and people of color start businesses and they're too small to even approach VCs for funding. So where do they go to get that first 30,000 and 50,000? And ifundwomen.com, and some of you may know it's actually started in the tri-state area and now they are in various cities. But you basically can crowdfund, similar to like a Kickstarter, but it's very much, they provide all the training and resources that are going to help you tap your network for these funds so that you can raise that first 30,000 and that allows you to hire a developer and maybe, a part-time salesperson, so to speak. And there's other networks like that. And of course, there's lots of consortiums of angel funders who are looking at funding women of color, funding women, that hopefully between the pack of many can make significant change. But I do agree with what Alex was saying, that by only saying this is going to be solved by the founders themselves, we need systemic change. And we need many more women and people of color managing the actual funds that are dispersed. Yeah. Like Left Tackle Capital, Samantha Katz's organization, is turning it upside down. So it's another good resource to look at.
But most venture capitalists are white men. That's just the demographic of that group. And when we talked about unconscious bias, there's also affinity bias and genuinely liking the people who kind of remind you of yourself or of your own network. And so every early stage company has many reasons to say no to funding them. Like every single one, you can find a reason to say no. If you're looking for a reason to say no, you will find one. What you need is to suspend disbelief for a small moment that this thing could actually make you money. And when you like the person and they remind you of yourself as a young, when you were in college, or they remind you of what Mark Zuckerberg must have been like at the beginning, right? And you think of all these tropes in your mind, it's a lot easier to suspend disbelief for certain people. When we were fundraising very, very early on, my co-founder and I were out there, pitched 150 people, 148 said no or ghosted us, essentially the same thing. It was very, very much hitting the pavement. We didn't have a network. We went and found people and then just got rejected, especially my co-founder did a lot of the pitching. She would joke it was a no over breakfast, lunch, coffee, dinner, drinks, repeat. And you need, you build resilience. But the things we heard, or what we later sort of pieced out of it, weren't deep concerns about our business model. People would make comments like, okay, well, I get that you want to build a big business, but I don't have the conviction that you really want this to be big. And we talked to all of these other male founders, and what they were saying is, well, one day you're going to have kids. Like, that's really what they were saying. Because my wife doesn't work, so how can I feel confident that you will? We had comments at the beginning. We had a lot of female professionals using our platform. Okay, well, sure, women on the coasts are looking for jobs, but what happens when your demographic turns 30 and,
Grow it and eat it.
And we would just pause and go, and what? Please finish the sentence. But there's so much there to unpack that when you have to make these decisions outside of a work context, it's someone's gut, and they're the ones who are going to go to their fund and say, this is going to make us money. There's a lot to dismantle in terms of societal sort of challenges for there to be any big change. And these are all private decisions of where to spend your money. So I think it's going to take a long time, unfortunately, for there to be change.
So now, over in the corporate world, and it could apply to startups too, how can we balance criticism and pushing for change in regards to gender inclusion with accepting the progress made so far and not shaming people when their efforts don't go as far as we'd like?
Can you clarify the question a little bit? Balance?
Sure. So sometimes there's backlash when a company is trying something, but it's not all the way there. So how do we balance criticism and making sure we're pushing companies to do the right thing in regards to inclusion, but also not shaming them if they didn't get it 100%?
I think that every company has to tackle their sort of inclusion efforts in the way that they feel sort of works for them. There's always historical context to how a company has done and how many women they don't have, which ones are in leadership positions. And so I think there's no wrong or right answer. And I think that the leadership of an organization needs to be held to account for what they're not doing well. So I don't, shy away from criticizing your board of directors or your executive committee or your CEO on a lack of progress or a lack of trying. So I have to say, I think I often describe the employee base at the Times as a little bit activist, the type of person that tends to be drawn to working for us tends to be really engaged in their work life and what the employee experience is. And they're really critical of the talent organization when they need to, pointing the finger. They've held our publisher to account, our CEO to account, and pushed for policies that work for women or work for our Black and NYT employee resource group has pushed for things and held the leadership to account. So I have to say, I don't feel the need for balance. I think that we should point things out that are not right and not feel shy about that.
And I think just the way
Stacey.
Sorry, we just met, yes. I think what she just showcased also is bringing your ERGs, bringing your employees into the mix and involving them in the decision-making process or in the input, right? If you bring them along, you're gonna run into less likely opportunity or opposition. And oftentimes they may even be closer to the problems than you are in maybe in a management or in a senior role at a company. So I think the companies that are bringing in everyone are going to be successful in the long run.
I think it's a great point. I agree that both bringing people together and holding companies to account and leaders to account is really important. I think there's two things I've seen be more successful or be successful in doing so. One is making sure there are targets. The number of, even if they're purely internal, though I would like more companies to have them be public, but a lot of companies say diversity and inclusion is an initiative or gender, parity or whatever it is, but there's nothing to know, did we make it or not? There's no line to cross. There's no, did we get 30% there, 100% there? And without that, you can just pat yourself on the back, or you can get angry. Either way, you don't have a yardstick. So pick a yardstick and internally at least, or for your own team or for your executive team, have something where you can at least track progress. Because if you don't measure it, it's not going to happen with every other initiative. The other thing I think can be very, very powerful, especially if you are not in a position of power to go up to the CEO and give them critiques directly, is to ask better questions. I think when someone says, great, we're going to really focus on diversity and inclusion this year, say, fantastic, how are we changing our resource allocation to do that? Who's accountable for that? Who should I, ask about progress? When will we get the next update? Asking questions that may help point out blind spots or opportunity for more action, I think can also be a way to your point around not shaming. I think there's many opportunities where shame is maybe shame, not feeling shame, but pointing things out that are wrong that aptly deserved.
Shaming's an awful thing.
Yes, but the
Effective sometimes.
yes, but the opportunity to sort of connect people's intention to their action, I think can happen really well through questions.
Great. And I think we have a moment for a quick audience question or two. If anyone has anything, there should be a mic out there.
Please don't be shy.
If no one has something, until someone goes to the mic, I was going to add a moment ago that, companies, if something is a priority, a company tends to put funds behind it. So I think if, sort of out there you find your organization saying they want to do something, saying they want to change something, but not providing the people charged with doing it with adequate resources, both people and money, not making it a third of someone's job and say, oh, this other thing is going to also be your new, who's ever been put upon in that way, right? And I think that if you're going to do something right, you'll put the resources behind it to do it. So I think that's an obvious thing to point out if you ever see babble or talk about an initiative, but you don't see, and we're going to allow this budget for this, or we're going to allot a new head count to actually get this thing we say is important is done. So I think looking for those signs is a surefire way to really see if your company is actually taking this seriously or they just want to have it be noted publicly that they said it.
All right. I think we're about out of time then. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you.